But relationships in general, are they getting better or worse as a result of all this mishigas? I think they're getting better. Because when you take all the things that distract us and keep us busy, when you take all those things away, we're left with what's real, with the core of what relationships are all about. What do we get from each other? There were too many things, too many incidentals that are not part of the relationship itself. And they were becoming way too important to us. It was overshadowing the people in the relationship. The things we do together, the places we go, the traveling, the visiting, that became more important than the people we're doing it with. But now that we can't do any of that stuff, we've focused back on who we are and how we need each other. It became much clearer. It's almost like when your spouse is away, you miss your spouse. What do you miss? That's really not the question. That's not the issue. You miss her because she is not home. So you don't miss her cooking, you don't miss her humor, you miss her. And why is that? Why does that happen when she's away? Because when she's away, those things disappear. And then you realize there's a someone, there's a person there, and that you need that person. Not their services, just the person. Sadly, when she comes home, it immediately goes back to being about some things. So that's why we have this song that the Rebbe would sing very often, describing the thirst that a person has when he's out in the desert. Knowing that there is no water available, the thirst becomes intense. But then, when he comes to civilization, the thirst is not so strong, even though he doesn't have water. But he knows there's water available, so he's not so thirsty anymore. When we're away from Yerushalayim, when we're exiled, then we realize how much we want to go home and how much we should appreciate our home. The question is, when we get home, will we go back to being focused on things, or will we be focused on the real meaning of the relationship? So when this is all over, and let's say the world gets back to normal, whatever that means, we'll just forget this whole thing and go back to the old way we did things? Hope not. I hope we have learned some really fundamental lessons that change you forever. And you can't go back. Cannot. It just won't feel right again. Because it isn't right. It's shocking that we even allowed it to happen the first time. So one of the things that we have to stay strong. There is so much negativity. There is so much ugliness going on. You could get the impression that the world is going backwards. We're getting worse. We're getting further away from the emes, from the truth. But it's not so. We're getting closer, much, much closer. Because when the evil is so blatant, when it hasn't any claim to legitimacy at all, then it's doomed. It's committing suicide. Evil has to hide behind some good if it wants to survive. When it stops hiding, it's finished. And the evil stopped hiding. Everywhere, in every area of life, all over the world, this phenomenon is happening. Evil can't hide anymore. It has reached a point of chutzpah where it doesn't feel like it needs to hide. It is so self-righteous, has no conscience whatsoever, doesn't feel a need to hide or to excuse itself, or at least to pretend to mean well, nothing. Then it's finished. Then it's an empty, hollow darkness that cannot go on. It's done. And this was predicted as the path, the roadway of Mashiach. So instead of having to believe that Mashiach is coming, we can now start tracking his progress. Because we know what's supposed to happen before he comes, and we're seeing it happen in front of our eyes, because we have an internet. So you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can see it yourself. Another thing that's happening, which was predicted as being a condition before Mashiach comes, is the breakdown of authority. There's no authority. The student talks back to the teacher. The daughter-in-law stands up against her mother-in-law. The daughter disobeys the mother. There's no leadership. That could sound like a negative development, or you could see it as a very positive thing. Why do we need authority? Why must a daughter obey her mother? Why must a student obey a teacher? Why must a country obey its king? Because the world is a very fragile structure, and it can very easily fall apart. Anarchy can take over. All of civilization can disappear overnight because it's all very flimsy. People made up laws like a good constitution, a beautiful constitution with good laws, but what's to keep people from simply saying, we don't buy it anymore, we're not interested. No more laws. That's it. What are you going to do? So until Mashiach comes, the world is held together, stitched together by authorities. And that's good news and bad news. Because if the authority is bad, we're all in trouble. If the authority is good, we can survive, we can function, we can have a livable society. The best news is when we won't need authority, when what is right will be so clear to everyone that we won't need one person telling another person how to be good. We won't need authority figures as if they are the only ones who know what's right, and we have to obey them because on our own we would never figure it out. Before the coming of Mashiach, what is right and what is good and what is true will be so obvious, we won't need to be told, we won't need to accept it on authority. It'll be so clear. In fact, the younger generation, the children, will see it more clearly than the older generation. Because the older generation has learned more, has read many more constitutions, and might still be convinced that that's the only way to have civilization. Write better laws, write a new constitution, obey the old constitution. We've got authority in our head, and we're afraid to let go. The younger generation, when they see how clearly and obviously right is right and wrong is wrong, true is true, and false is false, they'll be the first to recognize that something is different now. We don't need to be told to behave. You behave because it's obvious that that's the right way to go. So the younger generation will actually inspire the older generation. And if that's not nachas, I don't know what is. When your grandchildren are better than you, that's heaven. Don't even need to go to heaven. You have heaven right here. When your grandchildren are better than you, everything's good. Life is good. And that's what's happening. That is what's happening. So we mentioned before how the people who are looting and stealing, and they were never taught anything. Never, ever. I had a funny story, you might have heard it. I was going from Minnesota to Kansas City to give a speech. My brother was making an event. He's a shliach in Kansas. And he asked me to come speak at his event. But it was middle of the winter in the Midwest. So when I got to the airport, the place was a zoo. All the flights were being canceled. People had slept over the previous night in the airport. It was chaos. When I finally got to the ticket counter, the agent said, "Our flights are canceled. If you want to go to Kansas City, you have to go to the other airline down the airport, down the concourse, and they have a flight to Chicago. And from Chicago, there will be a flight to Kansas." As I'm about to walk away, a woman comes up behind me, all in a panic, and she says to the agent, "I need to get to Kansas City." So instead of repeating the whole speech, the agent wrote out a coupon transferring the tickets on her airline to the other airline for the both of us. One coupon with both our names on it. She says, "Take this to the other airline and they'll give you a flight to Chicago." So I walk away from that ticket counter and I suddenly have a traveling companion. So we're running to the other counter, and she says, "Why are you going to Kansas City?" I said, "I'm going there to speak." I said, "Why are you going?" She says, "I'm going to speak." I said, "Really? What do you speak about?" She says, "I'm an evangelist. I'm a missionary, and I speak about faith and religion." Anyway, this was going to be fun. So we get to the other counter, and there's a balagan there too. It's chaos. We fight our way to the counter, and the agent says, I'm going to give you tickets to Chicago, but the connecting flight from Chicago to Kansas City, I can't do that. I'm too frazzled. They'll do that there. So I'm just going to book you through to Chicago, and in Chicago, they'll give you the rest of the tickets. So hold on to that coupon that you got from the other airline. So we both walk away, and all of a sudden, we're inseparable. Because all the way to Kansas, there's one coupon for us. So we go to the gate, and we get on the flight to Chicago, and it's supposed to land in Chicago at 4 o'clock. And the flight from Chicago to Kansas City is 4:05. Anyway, on the flight all the way to Chicago, I learned everything you ever wanted to know about Christianity. We land in Chicago, and we're told that the flight to Kansas had left. We missed it. So we go to the telephones. Back in those days, it was the old wall telephones. I call my brother and ask if I should take the next flight, which isn't going to get until 9 o'clock at night. He says, yes, I should continue. I should come because there's there's entertainment on the program, which they were going to put on after my speech, but now they'll put it on first, and by the time I get there, it'll be perfect. She calls her people, and she finds out that there are almost 18 speakers in this program, and it'll be fine if she arrives at 9 o'clock. Now she says, I'm going to go to the counter and find out if there's an earlier flight in the other airport, because Chicago has 2 airports. I said, okay, I'll go get a drink and I'll meet you back here because I have the coupon. She walks away, and this guy who had been standing there by the phones, staring at me the whole time, walks over and says, you have a brother in Kansas City? I said, yes. He says, so you're tonight's speaker? I said, yeah, how do you know? He says, my wife and your sister-in-law are catering the event. I'm flying in from North Dakota to be there on time, and I slept in the airport in Minnesota overnight. And they put me on this flight, even though I was booked on the other airline. So I was on the flight with you, and I'm watching you the whole time, and we're going to be together at the event tonight. And by the way, is that your wife? I didn't know what to say. What am I going to say? She was much younger than me and did not look Jewish at all. What am I going to say? No, we're total strangers. But he heard me say, I'm going to get a drink and meet you back here. So I had to go through the whole explanation of... Anyway, the reason I'm telling you the story is because on the flight from Chicago to Kansas City, I thought I would teach her something about Judaism. Towards the end of the flight, she says, let me ask you a question. We had a crisis in the family. I wonder how you would have handled it. Her 14-year-old daughter was arrested for shoplifting. A pretty elaborate scheme. She had an older friend who worked at the cash register at a Target store. And they came up with the scheme. She filled a shopping cart full of merchandise, more than $400 worth, took it to her friend's cash register, and her friend rang it up for $15. And they were halfway out the door and they got caught. So this woman says, can you imagine how embarrassing it is for us? My husband and I were both missionaries. We're both evangelists. And our daughter is caught shoplifting like that. She says, how would you have handled it? Oh, and the worst part of her daughter's behavior is that she's not even repentant. I said, well, why would she be repentant? It's your religion, not hers. She says, what? That's exactly what my daughter said. I said, I know. All teenagers say that. It's your religion, you keep it. So I asked her a simple question. Did you ever tell your daughter that God doesn't allow stealing? That God doesn't want her to steal? She says, we don't talk like that. It's not about laws. We taught her to love God. So, well, you did a good job. She loves God. She also loves merchandise. You never told her that there is a commandment, thou shalt not steal, coming from God? No, we never actually said that. Well, then you're the one who's guilty. Can you imagine kids growing up today? What do they have in their diet? What do they hear? What do they see? What are they busy with? 10 Commandments? Never heard of it. They never heard of it. They're raised on a diet of violent television shows, violent games online. They would be surprised to find somebody who doesn't have a gun in their car. Everybody has a gun. Life is all about guns and shootings and bombings. Other than that, what is there? That's their entire diet. And then the experts say, that doesn't promote violence in children. That's all they know. For them to steal, a store is open, there's merchandise, you walk off with it. What is wrong? Aside from feeling entitled, which is another problem. Everybody's entitled. But to grow up on a diet of non-stop violence, you go from the television to the video game, to the movie, back to the television, to the video game, to the movie. There's no break. It's all guns, shooting, bombings, killings, fightings. That's it. You almost can't blame them. But you can blame the system. The public school system that does not allow mention of God, doesn't allow a prayer, doesn't allow a religious text. Well, what do you expect from the students? So we're learning a very important lesson. If you don't have moral education, you don't have moral people. And we got nobody to blame. So what are you going to do? Arrest them all? That's going to make them better? In prison, they'll learn the 10 Commandments? This is not going anywhere. So as we learn these lessons and we're honest enough to want to know what the solution is, whatever it is, without bias, it's pretty clear. I'll tell you this other story that this kid from Russia came to Minnesota. He was raised, of course, by communist ideologies, atheism, and so on. But he came to the Chabad house all inspired one day. What happened was he took a drive out in the country. 10 minutes from downtown Minneapolis, you're in farm country. So he was driving down a country lane, and he sees a booth that's selling vegetables by the bushel. He pulls over, he wants to buy some vegetables. He looks around, and there's nobody there. So he waits. Who runs this store? There's nobody there. And he realizes there isn't going to be anybody there. There's a sign on each basket: peppers, 25 cents, cucumbers, 20 cents, whatever it is. There are little bags there to fill with the vegetables you want to take. And then there's this large can nailed to the wall where you put your money to pay for what you're taking. He was stunned. He could not believe it. There were vegetables in the baskets. There was money in the can. Nobody stole it. He couldn't understand it. In Moscow, when he parks his car at night, he takes in the windshield wipers, the hubcaps, everything removable, the battery. He's got to take it in because he'll come in the morning and it'll be gone. He says a booth like that in Russia anywhere, the vegetables would be gone in a second. The money would disappear instantly. The booth itself would be taken for firewood. There'd be nothing left. And he could not understand how this works. How do you leave your produce and your money, nobody watching, and people are so honest that they'll pay for what they take? Couldn't believe it. And he said, I'm starting to get it. The only way that that's possible is if the people who live there believe in God, and God said no stealing. That's the only possibility. It's not the policeman, it's not the jail, it's not the punishment, it's the right and wrong of it. In an atheist society, there is no right and wrong, there's just police. And the police can be wrong, terribly wrong. So, the moral of the story is, we're learning firsthand experience, vivid lessons of the indispensable role of God in human life. There will be no civilization, there will be no societies, there will be no life without a fundamental belief in God, a fundamental belief in the Ten Commandments, and the awareness that God cares, God sees, God notices, and it either pleases him or displeases him. And that's enough to make you behave. So the world that we live in now, as we were talking before, that if you go on Zoom, you have no secrets, no privacy. The truth is, we practically have no privacy anyway. There are no secrets. The walls have ears, and everything comes out. Everything comes out. There's no hiding, which is in a sense good. If there's no hiding, then you got to do what's right. But it's interesting how from the darkest lessons, we get the brightest results. When we see how bad things get, we don't just decide to be better. We decide to be much better. If things are only a little bad, then we become a little good. When things are very bad, we become very good. Otherwise, it doesn't balance. So if you're following the news, you're going to see in the next couple of days and weeks how the evil that is no longer hiding and cannot hide is going to collapse on itself. It is committing suicide. Because when you turn on the light, crime stops. When it cannot hide anymore, it is intolerable. People will not put up with it. It cannot go on. All the years of all of history where evil could last for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Communism lasted 70 years. The reason it can last that long is because it hides behind some legitimacy. But when it's not hiding, it can't last 70 years. Can't last a weekend. So now that the evil is coming out so blatantly and unapologetically, it's killing itself. It's undoing itself, which is exactly what happened to communism. Nobody destroyed it. It destroyed itself. It simply imploded. There was just nothing legitimate left. One big, empty, wicked lie. So it collapsed. Gorbachev was smart enough to say, I'm not going down with it. I'm stepping out. And he became the hero. But even that evil lasted way too long. But it masqueraded as a blessing to the worker, more equality for all human beings. It paraded itself like some kind of a moral virtue. Today, the evil is not even bothering to masquerade. So it's finished. As it shows itself, it's going to look really frightening. We could get discouraged, but we shouldn't. We're watching it undo itself. And that also was predicted before the coming of Mashiach. So there's reason to be optimistic, even in this crazy darkness. And it's universal. It's not just one city. It's not just one religion. It's not just one culture. It's everywhere. Everywhere, all over the world, the evil that existed is not hiding anymore. And so it's doomed. The truth will finally prevail. Now, the exciting thing is that we can actually do something to be active participants, not just bystanders, not spectators, although that would be good too. Just sit and watch how the world becomes better. But even more than that, do something to make the world better. Doesn't have to be big. You can't even do big things. You can't even leave your house. So it has to be little mitzvahs, little deeds of goodness, kindness, choosing life, supporting life, calling people who need a little encouragement. All these little ways, and we can make life a little sweeter. Not only despite the darkness, but inspired by the darkness. So, we went through Purim with the virus. We went through Pesach with the virus. We went through Shavuos with the virus. And now that the holidays are gone, we're dealing with riots. I have a little suspicion that the panic over the virus was way out of proportion, which means it took on a life of its own. So there was the virus and there was the panic, two separate things. We've had viruses before without a panic. Maybe because the media wasn't so available to report every tragedy. But you can have a virus, you can have a health crisis without panic. You can have panic even without a crisis. You just scare people, you create a panic. So the reaction to the virus took on a life of its own. The reaction to the crime, the policeman's crime, has also taken on a life of its own. It's almost like the crime is forgotten. It's just riot time. So we really should be focused on understanding, why is this happening? The panic was not from the virus. And this rioting is not from the tragedy. There's something else going on. And it's going to lead to an improved world, to a vastly improved world. And an improved world doesn't mean more money and more comfort. It means better values, better people, better interpersonal relationships. The rat race, the competition, the need to outdo each other, threatened by a stranger, as if there isn't enough room for everybody, there isn't enough food for everybody, there isn't enough money for everybody. What a crazy notion. Completely out of touch with reality. Because in reality, there is plenty for everyone. But we panic. That's got to go. That kind of a life we don't want anymore. We don't want this nastiness, this stress, this pressure, the competition, the threat. It's so unnecessary. Don't want to go back to that. We want to go back to a time when people left their homes in order to see what they can do to make life easier for the people around them. to see if your neighbor needed some help. Not to compete with them, not to be jealous of them, to try to help them. That's an improved world. So we should all merit to enjoy the time when, for a brief period of history, a little slice of history, we will see the transition. We will see the darkness turn to light. Our children and our grandchildren will never see darkness. To them, light will be the only possibility. We stand at the crossroads. We're the ones who are going to experience exile and then see the transition from exile to Geula. We will see both sides of the coin. It's not going to last very long, and there isn't going to be another generation to have that experience. It's kind of exciting and kind of scary. And that's why in Tehillim, King David says, when Mashiach comes and the world becomes normal, those who will be there will feel like they just woke up from a dream. Because only in a dream can you have such a combination of darkness and light. It'll feel like it's a dream. It can't be true. Out of the darkness comes light. And very quickly, we'll have to pinch ourselves, make sure that we're awake and that it's really real. But that's how good it's going to be. So let's do something to increase the goodness so that we're not spectators, but we're actually partners with Mashiach. Not wait for him to do all of it. Prepare the way. Even a good thought, meaning an optimistic thought, a thought about how life is good. Life, every minute of life is worth it. It's a pleasure. That alone can chase away the darkness. Not only for yourself, but for the whole world, because we're all in it together. There is this thick layer of darkness that reaches from one side of the world to the other. If you weaken it here, it is weaker everywhere. If you brighten the darkness a little here, it is brighter everywhere. So here's the final thought for tonight. One of the things that Hasidus introduced, part of the revolution in Jewish thinking, it was always a very personal affair, whether you do a mitzvah or you do a sin. That's how it was taught. Your soul is on the line. If you do a mitzvah, you make yourself healthier. If you do a sin, you destroy yourself. Of course, there were statements way back when that if you're bad, the neighborhood goes bad, and then the whole town will go bad. So of course you have an influence. Bad people make bad neighbors and so on. But still, your sin was your sin. And unless you go around telling people to be corrupt, your sin is yours. Affects only you. Hasidus introduced the idea that we all live in one atmospheric bubble. so that whatever happens on one side of the earth affects the entire earth, both negatively and positively. Somebody releases a virus in China, and the whole world is going to pay for it. So if you have a positive thought anywhere in the world, the entire atmosphere, the entire condition of the world has improved a tiny bit. And if you do a sin, it's not just you. It's the entire condition of the world that is imbalanced by your sin. So Hasidus says, before you sin, stop and think. If it was just you, no, do what you want. But it's not just you. Everything you do affects the entire world. And if it affects the world, it affects the creator of the world. So the consequence of your behavior has suddenly become cosmic, which is the exact opposite of the petty, greedy, entitled attitude that today's kids have. It's just me, it's my life, none of your business. It's my body, I can do whatever I want. No. Everything you do affects everyone in the world. So that gives you a sense of significance you never thought you had. Everything you do now becomes important, powerful. And when you do good, you're doing the whole world good. And when you do bad, you're doing the whole world bad. That's a very different attitude. That was introduced about 200 years ago. Now, with the internet, it's so real. What you do on one side of the world affects the other side of the world instantaneously, in real time. So now doing a little mitzvah is suddenly awesome in its significance. So, in the olden days, when you wanted to threaten people in order to get them to behave well, you had to threaten them with dire consequences. Oh yeah, you're gonna suffer. Oh, is it gonna be bad? Today, those threats don't work. But there's a different threat. The new threat is, Mashiach can come at any minute, and you haven't even done your mitzvah yet. That's a much better threat. Don't waste time. If you want to contribute to the coming of Mashiach, you got to do it before he arrives. So what are you waiting for? That should keep us awake at night. How much time do we have to add a little goodness to the world so that we are participants, not spectators? So the good is coming. That's without a question. But with you or without you? That's a scary question. Things are going to get all good without me? Hey. So let's do what we can. Heroics are not necessary. But indifference, inactivity, that's not good. So look around and see what you can do to make God's world a little more God-like. That makes sense.